Riven, the sequel to Myst, is one of the greatest games of all time. Considering my channel is best known for my commentary walkthroughs of Myst I and Myst III, the obvious question is why didn't I cover the game in the middle? As Atrus himself says,
"There's a great deal of history that you should know."
People have been asking me about a possible Riven series for years, but until now I haven't had the toolbox to give a proper response. In fact, this is one of the main reasons I wanted to make the ShadyParadox files. Each episode builds on the ones before, and in particular parts 2 and 3 lay out my philosophy on what I want to accomplish in whatever polished series I make in the future. And that philosophy definitely applies here, so you might want to give the earlier videos a look if you want the full context. I'm not gonna leave you hanging, so I'll just tell you right now, I genuinely don't know whether I'm going to make a formal commentary series for Riven or not. There's a good chance I will, and there's a good chance I won't. The goal of this video is to lay out all the competing sides of my thought process, because my audience deserves an explanation, and I've been out of sync with you guys for way too long. I'll start with a little personal story. I had a rather exceptional experience playing this game as a kid. My grandfather passed away in 1998, and somehow I was the one of all his descendants that ended up with his computer. He had spent $6,000 for a special setup that he wanted to operate from his recliner. Yes, that's in 1998 dollars. It had a 36-inch monitor and remote keyboards, way ahead of its time. Anyway, playing Riven was basically all I did on it. My bedroom was a converted garage on the opposite side of the house from the rest of the bedrooms, so I could just turn out the lights and fully absorb myself in this game for weeks at a time. With a setup like that, having to walk across the room to swap discs is entirely worth it. Part of the reason it took me so long to beat the game was that I had the monitor set too dark, so I couldn't see some of the buttons. But most days I didn't really even care if I made progress or not. I was perfectly happy to just wander around the huge world for hours and admire all the different views. So in case there was any doubt, this game is really special to me. I firmly place Riven among my top 5 personal favorite games of all time, which makes it all the more strange that I would skip over it when making Myst videos. So why didn't I make a Riven series back in the day? Well, those of you who were around at the time might be aware of the prevailing narrative. Even though it's practically irrelevant now, I never made a public statement about it, so I guess this video is as good a time to do so as any. What you may have heard is that I arranged an agreement to split the Myst series with Let's Player Sven Groot. The core of the rumor is correct, but not everyone understood the motivation, so I'll clear up any misconceptions. The early days of YouTube gave a tremendous first mover advantage for anyone covering a particular game. It wasn't just that you were the only person on the platform covering the game, because you would stay on top even long after others joined in. What would happen is once you got the views, you would dominate all the search results, and your competitor's part 1 appeared after your part 30. This was fantastic when you were first, but of course it also meant that if you were second, you would face a massive uphill battle. So now you might understand where I was coming from when I messaged Sven. I was midway through my realMYST series when I saw him start churning out his Riven videos at a much quicker pace than I was going. Although I initially planned to cover the series in order, I saw the writing on the wall. More importantly, as I mentioned in part 2 of this series, Myst III was the real game I wanted to cover anyway. Not knowing what Sven's plans were, I went straight for diplomacy, basically buttering him up in a pathetic attempt at the art of the deal. Okay, maybe it wasn't that hollow, but either way, my focus was on securing those Myst III search results. Luckily, he wasn't planning on covering that game anyway, so maybe things wouldn't have turned out much differently had we never spoke. Still, we went ahead and made an internet handshake agreement to stay out of each other's way. At least, that's the way it sounded to me in our messages. But later on, when he decided to go ahead and make videos for Myst 1 and 3, he didn't ask me or anything, he just made a unilateral decision. Obviously that's his right, and it didn't really matter anyway since I already finished the Exile series, and of course by then YouTube had improved its algorithms. I don't remember all the details now, and maybe I misread the situation, but I do remember there was something about the way that whole thing unfolded that just kinda rubbed me the wrong way. Ah well, it's all ancient history and has no bearing on the present. I'm just giving my side of the story for anyone who was curious. So now let's talk about the present. What would a formal Shady Riven series look like if I do decide to make one today? Of course, I'd want my series to be informative, so I'd first have to do a bit of research and refresh my knowledge of the game. The challenge here is that a lot of my old trusty resources no longer exist. For example, many people are aware of the spider clues for the Riven Easter eggs, but I remember there was even a sequence of difficult internet puzzles just to get to each one of those poems. If only I knew how to archive back then. More than that, the internet was abuzz in the late 90s with a plethora of websites where people would collaborate and gather as much trivia in the game as they could find. One website was even dedicated to just listing out all the flaws and bugs in the game, not out of disrespect, but just as another treasure hunt for everyone to play around with. Alas, most of these resources have long since disappeared as well, so I'll always wonder what information is lost forever. Fortunately, I've found some old stuff archived, and the Myst community is still very active, so I'm sure I can still make something good though. Another issue I think about is how the slideshow format of the game might affect my creativity. See, there's a reason I chose to play through the 3D remake of Myst instead of the original. Part of making a series unique and immersive is its visual appeal. A 3D game that offers finely tuned control allows you to create your own unique variety of experiences. Even subtle things like the speed at which the mouse jerks around can add personality. Myst III was more restrictive with its pre-rendered graphics, but the 360 view still worked for me well enough. However, Riven only offers fixed screenshots most everyone has already seen. This is not a criticism of Riven itself as a game, but rather of how well it translates into a video series. It's not a deal breaker or anything, but on the surface, any video walkthrough of Riven will look and feel mostly indistinguishable from the others. You could argue old Sierra point-and-clicks have the same problem, but I would counter that the interaction with narration and dialogue compensates for this. A solution that comes to mind is perhaps I could wait for the Starry Expanse project to come out and make a series featuring that instead. If you don't know what that is, it's an attempt to create a 3D version of Riven. It started out as an unofficial fan project they've been working on almost as slowly as I do, but recently Cyan agreed to work with them and make it an official project. Which I think is good, but they've since been less able to disclose as many details to the public. So if I were to make a Riven series, it's possible I might record this version instead, but I would have to play it first to confirm it is as good as it looks. The other major challenge would be figuring out the logistics of the path I want to take through the game. I explained this concept and the goals I have when planning this out in part 3 of this series, and how it's designed to complement the character I want to play. Riven becomes a rather messy challenge in this regard because it is such a large and non-linear game. Here's an excerpt from Sven's LP that exemplifies what I'm talking about. His goal is to take on the role of a guide, and so his path through the game is very efficient. The best time to raise the bridge to the top of the Gold Dome is right after crossing the bridge from Crater Island, which sets up an easier path later in the game. However, someone seeing the game for the first time may not understand why he's doing it, and if they do, it won't be until later. Therefore, the character I described in part 2 probably wouldn't do it like this either, because he himself is someone playing for the first time. Listen to what Sven says here.
I'm just gonna raise this bridge now, which will save me some time later because I don't have to come back here to do that. I can raise the bridge now because now I have another way out of here, which is through here.
This is correct, but it is an example of telling before showing, which may work for him as a guide, but not for me as a character. And this results in us having two different approaches to planning out the route. Next, Sven clears the alternate path back to the rotating room. This gives him an opportunity to explore the path that he just raised. He doesn't do it though because it's not an efficient thing to do. He would have to wait for the room to rotate a bunch of times, then it would just lead to a puzzle he hasn't found the solution for yet anyway. So I understand why he didn't do it, but this is my whole point about the character thing. No explorer in his right mind is just gonna turn around here and go do something else without even looking at the area he just unlocked. So if I were to turn around here, I'd have to come up with some kind of excuse for my character. And I guess this is the other thing I wanted to clarify about the real difference between myself and Sven, because I think there's an impression out there that I simply don't know how to tackle non-linear games. Really, I'm just working on a different and, in my defense, somewhat more complex logistical problem since we have two different goals as a guide and as a character. It's not merely that he finds paths I couldn't find, which, I don't know, maybe, but also he accepts paths I don't accept because I operate under a different set of constraints. I'm not saying there's no solution though. There certainly exist paths that show a decent amount of the game, allow me to stay in character, and don't require too much backtracking. However, each solution sacrifices a bit more in at least one of these categories than I would like. One thing you have to know about me though is that I never shy away from the most ambitious ideas. And I've come up with one outside-the-box format for Riven that I find especially intriguing, although it would be difficult to pull off. So I'm certainly not committing to this because it isn't practical. But let's go ahead and take a moment to indulge in this crazy idea, because among my options for Riven content, I think this would be the optimal design. It's just an idea, but here's what I'm thinking. Simply put, I could run through the game twice. Yep, I mean 2 completely separate complementary series. This would solve problems on so many levels. This may very well be the option I'd choose if I do pull the trigger. So let me try to describe what that would look like. The first thing to understand is that it would not be twice the work, because each run would be shorter than a single run that tried to do everything by itself. Neither run would have to show everything because they would effectively have each other's backs. In fact, they would definitely cover more than a single run could possibly do. To put it as vaguely as I can, there are 2 major puzzles in the game, and a few cutscenes are slightly different depending on the order you solve those 2 puzzles. There's no immersive way to handle this in a single run, but it's obvious how to handle it in 2. Whichever order you solve them in one run, you do the opposite in the other run. And here's a subtle idea. Some of the stones in the animal puzzle offer 2 distinct ways to get the right symbol. Running the game twice presents the option to split them up, showing only one or the other in each run. If I did this, it would be the ultimate case of show don't tell, because at no point would I openly acknowledge that both methods exist. Each run would go different directions at forks in the road, leading to 2 very different experiences of the game. This comprehensive experience of playing Riven is ultimately what this would be all about. So if taking the wrong path at a fork leads a long way to a dead end, so be it, it's part of the game. Each run can tolerate some backtracking if it doesn't take the wrong path all the time, which it won't because these can now be split between the 2 runs. Some backtracking is even desirable too, because taking in the scenery from the opposite angle contributes something as well. I'd make sure each direction of every ride appears in at least one of the 2 runs. So there's a lot I can do to keep these runs distinct from one another. However, when all is said and done, most of the game is still in the overlap in that Venn diagram, since the same puzzles need to be solved in both runs. This is where the character becomes essential, as I can take on different personalities in each one. Perhaps in one of them I could try to recapture the playful character I portrayed in the realMYST series, then adopt a more serious one like the Exile character in the other run. Having 2 different characters would place the 2 runs on separate timelines, so they likely wouldn't acknowledge each other's existence. Another idea is for one run to feature the original game, and the other to feature the Starry Expanse. But there are a couple caveats to this. I don't know how Starry Expanse will turn out, so I can't say for sure whether it would be something I'd want to cover. Or maybe it'll be so good I'll want it to host both runs. In any case, if I am going to make Riven content one day, I think it'll have to wait until Starry Expanse comes out. Even if I commit to playing at least one run of the original game, I should stick to what I said in part 3 of this series and do as much design work up front as I can before doing any production. The worst thing I can do is commit half the content before really knowing what my best options are for the other half. But let's not get carried away here and forget the fact I'm not actually sure whether I want to pursue any of this Riven stuff in the first place. The more I think about it, the more I'm stuck squarely on the fence. So to continue the theme I set in the last video, I'm going to sum everything up by listing out the main reasons both for and against making Riven content. Bear in mind, these bullet points do not have equal weight, so I'm not making my decision on merely which column has more items. The biggest and most important argument in favor of making at least one full commentary walkthrough of Riven is simply the fact that you guys demand it. I don't know how to say this without sounding corny, but in a way it's an honor that so many of you have told me you want to see my personality specifically accompanying this incredible game, when there's plenty of perfectly good material on it already out there. However, that also makes me question whether I can actually live up to the hype. Remember what I said in part 3. In order to justify any project, I first need to find a unique contribution that I can bring to the table. Well, I haven't mentioned this point until now because I'm not fully confident what that would be. I mean, that's great if you like my style or sense of humor or whatever, but I can apply that to anything I work on. But what would I be contributing to Riven specifically? The puzzles in this game are intended to be solved in at most a couple of specific ways that everybody already knows, so I can't exactly tread new territory there. I also don't think my knowledge of the game is special in any way. Maybe I'll find some things after some research, or perhaps I can recruit some of you to help me out when the time comes. But even then, I'm not sure how much of it would be stuff that most people haven't already seen before. Despite all that, I think there's still a good chance I could make something decent though, because that solution with 2 complementary runs looks really promising. I know that sounds strange right after I just said I can't think of a purpose, but the advantage with this model is it provides massive improvements in both route planning and character motive without sacrificing game content. Of course, a design that ambitious obviously presents additional problems of its own. A game this large with huge swaths covered twice presents a daunting amount of dead air time I need to fill. I didn't skip any travel when I went back to get the blue pages in realMYST, and ever since then I've decided I prefer to maintain continuous play if I can. Hopefully I can come up with enough material to keep it fresh the entire way. Now remember earlier I talked about how I don't find the slideshow format of Riven particularly inspiring for making videos. However, that same format would make it pretty easy to record, so these are 2 sides of the same coin. Conversely, Starry Expanse may provide a fresh look with new opportunities, but it would be harder to make the videos for it. Since I haven't seen Starry Expanse, I consider this a wash. And of course, the other major reason I should do something with Riven is that it's one of the greatest games of all time. Sometimes I look back at how I skipped over it and wonder if this looks like I disrespected it in some way. I never meant to imply this game somehow doesn't deserve a tribute, because it certainly does. But here's the thing. Considering how long everything takes me to produce, I'm not going to be finishing very many polished projects. If I did make a Riven series next, then all my major commentary projects would still pertain to the Myst series. Maybe that sounds perfectly natural to you. I'm not fully comfortable admitting this, but in a way that actually is a problem for me. I don't want to be typecast as strictly a Myst player. At least, not anymore. I want the chance to earn a reputation as an all-around adventure game content creator, and Riven at this point isn't going to help me with that. So keep in mind that a potential Riven project does not exist in a vacuum. It's only one in a line of competing potential projects. The question isn't merely whether I should make a Riven series or not, it's whether it wins out against the other candidates. So I have a simple favor to ask you. If you're in the crowd that's really pushing for a Riven series, I only ask that you please hear out the rest of my case and keep an open mind, especially since I think the verdict on this one is to wait for Starry Expanse anyway. Over the next several videos in this series, I'm going to delve into the other project ideas I have, and only once those have a fair shake can we properly compare them and figure out the best path forward. You like what I might do with Riven? Who knows, maybe you'll like one of the other ideas better. I have to say, I'm really happy to get this video out. A lot of people have been asking about Riven, but I can't exactly express these thoughts in YouTube reply comments, so I'm glad we're finally on the same page. Let me know what your thoughts are on all this too. Meanwhile, I'm going to take a break from this series and wrap up the Fly Mode series. When this resumes, the next project I'll address is the one I was able to publish a small piece of, but then it sadly ran out of gas very early on. See you in part 6.